Iran said goodbye to Ebrahim Raisi this week, interring the late president at the nation's holiest Shiite shrine on Thursday. It comes just days after he, the country's foreign minister, and 6 others were killed in a helicopter crash in a remote region along the Azerbaijan border. While state loyalists have dutifully packed into mosques and public squares to pray for Raisi, there is reportedly little in the way of public grief being seen on Iranian streets, where shops remained open and ordinary life continued uninterrupted. Many opponents of the Iranian regime have even taken to the streets to celebrate, setting off fireworks and handing out sweets to mark Raisi's death, according to a Reuters report, because nothing says good riddance like fireworks and handing out sweets. The public reaction stands in stark contrast to the massive outpouring of grief that followed the deaths of revered Iranian figures such as Qasem Soleimani, the former commander of the IRGC's Quds Force, who was killed in a U.S. drone strike in 2020. So, you ask yourself, why has the death of Iran's president not triggered the same public response? Well, good question. It stems, though, from his controversial history as a loyal enforcer of the theocratic regime. Known as the Butcher of Tehran, Raisi served as Tehran's prosecutor general from 1989 to 1994, overseeing a death commission, well, that sounds benign, that ordered the mass execution of thousands of Iranian dissidents in 1988. Now, Amnesty International estimates that at least 5,000 dissidents were killed in the decade following the 1979 revolution. The U.S. has accused Raisi of decades of human rights abuses, including executing children and imprisoning prominent human rights lawyers. So obviously, he was an ideal candidate for the Iranian regime. Raisi rose to the presidency in 2021 in an election that, well, sparked widespread protests and allegations that it was rigged in his favor. Enthusiasm for his administration was already low, as the election had the lowest voter turnout in 4 decades. As president, Raisi loyally worked to implement the vision of his close ally, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, expanding Iranian terrorist proxy networks across the Middle East and ratcheting up tensions with Israel to historically unprecedented levels. Now, at home, Raisi tightened morality laws and stepped up enforcement of Iran's hijab and chastity laws. After 2 women died in custody for violating the law, protesters took to the streets in numbers not seen since the Iranian Revolution. Raisi responded with a violent crackdown that killed hundreds of Iranians between 2022 and 2023, according to Forbes. A 21-year-old student in Tehran told Reuters she was not saddened by his death due to the violent crackdown on protesters, but added, quote, "I am sad because even with Raisi's death, this regime will not change." Another Tehran shopkeeper told Reuters, "Who cares? One hardliner dies, another takes over, and our misery continues," reflecting the sentiments of many Iranians who expect little change in their day-to-day lives, not to mention reflecting the sentiments in the classic Who song, "Won't Get Fooled Again." Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. The cause of Sunday's crash is still under investigation, but most signs point to either a technical failure or weather conditions or both. Still, Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, couldn't help himself and blamed the accident on the United States, never waste an opportunity to blame the U.S., claiming sanctions were preventing Iran from having a more modern aviation industry. Now, Zarif forgot to mention that the sanctions are in place due to the regime's support and funding of terrorism, their abysmal human rights record, including the constant suppression of women's rights, and, of course, their pursuit of nuclear weapons. All that likely just slipped Zarif's mind. Raisi was traveling in a 40-year-old American-made Bell 212 helicopter. No word on whether it was blasting Fortunate Son from its state-of-the-art 8-track player as it careened into the side of the mountain. Well, that's not fair to denigrate the 8-track player. I love the 8-track player. I had one in my very first car, which was a classic Ford Granada. As for the vacancy that Raisi's death left, he was immediately succeeded by his first vice president, Mohammad Mokber. And he'll now serve as acting president until new elections are held on June 28th. Iran's Guardian Council, the 12-member body responsible for organizing the elections, said that the next president will run the country for a new 4-year term, not just for the remaining years of Raisi's term. Now, Raisi's death isn't expected to have much of an impact on the regime's policies in the short term, especially when it comes to foreign policy. Most of the power in the country remains in the hands of the nation's supreme leader, who acts as Iran's commander-in-chief. However, it's in the race to succeed supreme leader where we may see some very interesting developments. The ultra-conservative Raisi was seen by many to be the top contender for the position. Raisi was a favorite of the 85-year-old Khamenei and had received his backing during the 2021 presidential election. During his presidency, the two had worked closely on both domestic and foreign policy matters, with many saying Raisi was being groomed for the top spot. He was a loyal toady for the supreme leader and an avid fan of cracking down on dissent and protest from the Iranian people. Raisi's rivals are now likely to scramble to fill the vacuum his death has left, and one of those rivals is Mojtaba Khamenei, a hardline cleric who also happens to be the supreme leader's son.